What responsibilities and ethical challenges emerge when humans intervene to restore ecosystems? Can competing priorities, such as economic profit versus environmental justice, ever be brought into alignment? Who bears accountability to ensure that artificial intelligence, one of the most rapidly growing technologies with a startling rate of resource consumption, becomes environmentally sustainable? And perhaps most importantly, how might we bring conversations about environmental conservation and land use into a nonpartisan arena, even when there may be deep ideological divisions? These are some of the ethical questions and concerns the Roger Mudd Center for Ethics will highlight and address during this year's multidisciplinary program, Taking Place: Land Use and Environmental Impact. Over the year, we will delve into different meanings of taking place. We will begin with exploring the environmental, human, and political consequences of mining lithium, an element integral to developing green technologies. Its mining in the country of Chile raises complex dilemmas and questions about what an ethical energy transition from fossil fuels to green technologies may look like. We'll continue our investigation of fossil fuels by examining the lands designated for petroleum refineries, often places with vulnerable populations. The year-long series will also address community-led land use interventions that are taking place and aspiring to promote biodiversity through rewilding practices and soil rejuvenation efforts. These are, of course, not without their own ethical issues, which we'll also navigate. Framing this year's inquiry is an exhibition of Edward Burtynsky's commanding large-form color photographs that capture the magnitude of the natural world marked and affected by human industry, such as steel production in China, artificial salt evaporation ponds in Senegal, massive irrigation systems in the Netherlands, as well as coal, uranium, and gold mines in South Africa. At once compelling and troubling, these landscapes capture the disturbing aftermath of industrial processes used to maintain a growing global population. Through this photographic exhibition, along with the accompanying lecture series and community engagement, the Mudd Center for Ethics looks forward to welcoming you and to engaging with you about the scope of interconnected issues related to land use and its environmental impact from both global and local perspectives. Hello. Oops. Can you hear me? Hi. Can you hear me pretty well? Yeah, good. Hi. I'm Melissa Karen. I'm the director of the Mudd Center for Ethics, and I'm joined by my colleagues. Kate Sacchi is in the back, and Dan Ranweiler is right here, in welcoming you to this evening's event and our sort of penultimate, our close to ending of this whole year's investigation of environmental ethics. As we envisioned this year's series, we'd hoped to end it by bringing the conversation a bit closer to home. So we started this series looking, if you remember, in September, we started with Thea Riofranco's talk and lecture that brought us to Chile and looked at extractive practices and mining practices of lithium. And then over the course of the semesters, the 2 semesters, we traveled to many places and considered lots of different landscapes and land uses and their environmental impacts. Framing all of that was an exhibition which was made possible through a collaboration between Mudd and museums with Isra El-Bashir. And that exhibition is still up and running, just so that you know, should you be interested to see it. It will still be up until April 18th, and it's the extraordinary photographs of renowned photographer Edward Burtynsky. He does these large-scale aerial photographs of places and lands throughout the world that have been deeply impacted and marked by extractive mining practices. So that tied into this year's look at Taking Place, the title of our series, Taking Place, Land Use and Environmental Impact. So the show is called Edward Burtynsky, Taking Place. It's on our campus at the Reeves Center, right over there, I think, there. And it's really worth a look if you have time to check it out. I also want to bring your attention to one more event that we will have. This will be April 17th through the 18th, and the Mudd Center is collaborating with Lifelong Learning, which is now under the direction of James Lambert. On April 17th through 18th, that is going to be the Tom Wolfe Seminar Weekend. It's sometime in April usually when Lifelong Learning has the opportunity to host an author to come and speak about his or her work with the WNL campus. This year, we're hosting jointly George Saunders, who you may know. He's an award-winning author who is the author of Lincoln in the Bardo, which was the Booker Prize-winning book in 2017. So I just want you to know that he will be here, and he'll be talking about his most recent publication, a novel that was published in January 2026, this year, and it's called Vigil. The reason why we're collaborating is because the book really delves into issues of environmental concerns and stewardship or lack thereof in relation to the persona or the story of an oil tycoon or an oil CEO who is dying. And his sort of regret, sometimes lack of regret, around these issues of environmental stewardship. So that's where the tie-in comes, and we're very excited for that collaboration. And I just wanted you to mark your calendars and be aware of that. This evening, we're not talking about regret. This evening is something different. We have a moment to listen to a real visionary in this field of regenerative farming and the relationship between that and upholding, helping biodiversity and human health. She's looking at those intersections. And the she I am speaking of is Dr. Daphne Miller. Dr. Miller is a practicing family physician, a science writer, a clinical professor at the University of California, San Francisco, and a research scientist at the University of California, Berkeley School of Public Health. Her work, as I mentioned, thoughtfully bridges medicine, agriculture, and environmental health, exploring how regenerative farming practices can nourish both ecosystems and human well-being. She is the founder of the Health from the Soil Up initiative at Berkeley Center for Occupational and Environmental Health, where she engages professionals in reimagining our food system from the ground up. A graduate of Brown University and Harvard Medical School, she is also the author of several influential books and articles, and it was her book, Farmacology with an F, so Farmacology, Total Health from the Soil, from the soil up, that was so inspirational to me and part of and really formative for this year's discussion. And the Mudd Fellows actually just last week had time to go over 2 chapters of that book. And so it's really an honor to be able to have Dr. Miller with us here. That book is a little bit older, so her work has continued on from that point. And that's what she will have an opportunity to talk to us about. But before I turn it over to Dr. Miller, I do want to note that it's due to the generosity and vision of another physician from our Lexington, Virginia, Dr. Ralph Caldroni, that we can have Dr. Miller here today with us. He has made a gracious, he's supported us graciously at the Mudd Center, I'll say, and it's because of that that we're able to have Dr. Miller with us today. So without further delay, please help me in welcoming Dr. Miller.
Good evening, and thank you so much, Melissa, for that beautiful introduction, and thank you to the Mudd Center and generous donors of the Mudd Center, and thank you to all of you who have come here this evening. This is my first time in Lexington. I suspect it won't be my last. It's a wonderful place, and I was reading about the history a little bit of the school. And I read that in 1800, a pack of students got expelled or suspended for running naked across campus. And I said, wow, this is my place. I mean, I'm from Berkeley, so we do that all the time. We go teach classes that way. No, but seriously. So I'd love a show of hands to get started here. I mean, how many of you are either, well, we have a doctor here almost in the front row, but how many of you are in health professions or thinking about going into health professions, just out of curiosity? All right, so a fair number of you, or don't want to yet admit that you're going into health professions. And how many of you are working with the land, or ecology, or farming, or something related to environmental? Wonderful, sort of an equal amount, or almost the balance of the room. So to say that I actually think of all of you collectively as kind of doing the same work. You're really on the front line of health. And if you walk away from this evening with no other point than that, please let that be the thing that you take home. So why is a family doctor here tonight to talk to you about soil? Not a common occurrence for that to happen. And there's a lot of things that I can point the finger at in terms of what made me tick the way I did. But this was probably a big moment for me. Over 30 years ago, and here I am gazing at one of the first babies that I delivered as an intern at Natividad Medical Center in Salinas, California. And as I'm gazing at this baby, I'm thinking of the wonder of life and this amazing privilege that I had as a doctor to do this work. But I'm also thinking, why is it that so many of my patients here in Natividad are being harmed by our agriculture? Now, if any of you know where Natividad is in Salinas, it's in the lettuce basket of California. It's the place that grows all the greens that come out to the rest of the country. Without that region, you probably wouldn't be seeing asparagus here, except for very tiny parts of the year, or artichokes, or cilantro, or carrots, or strawberries, or so on and so forth, or lettuce. We grow a lot of that food for the United States. And in the hospital, I came there as this, terrified intern. As I was going from emergency room to ICU to the wards to the labor and delivery, I started to notice that I was seeing really high rates of neurodevelopmental disorders in the kids, and was told it was from the organophosphates that were being applied in the fields, which are thankfully sort of not allowed anymore, but still. I was seeing mechanical injuries in farm workers losing digits or limbs from working in unsafe conditions. I was seeing respiratory diseases from the stuff that they're applying on the fields. And on the other side, I was seeing many patients who were suffering from chronic diseases related to poor diet because they couldn't afford the fruits and vegetables that we were growing in that field. And I went up to my teachers, the folks who were teaching me medicine there at Natividad, and I asked them, I said, how is it that we have such an unhealthy agricultural system? And how can we change it to make our patients healthy? And they looked at me with blank stares, and they said, Miller, get back to the ER and do your work. Stay in your lane. And that's really how we thought about these things back then. But for me, that sort of sent me on a career trajectory. Whenever anybody tells me to stay in my lane, you better be sure I'm going to start veering out. And really trying to understand how it is that we could begin to redesign the way we grow food and the way we produce our food to make it healthier for ourselves and for the planet. And it's been a long journey. I've spent time interning on farms. I've traveled around the world doing this. I'm a constant kind of student of this very simple question. I've written books, which I've then revised and had different ideas on, and so on and so forth. But I wanted to share with you one aha moment that occurred for me. And it was here. You can probably see my shadow with my little cowboy hat. I'm actually standing in the bed of a pickup truck, taking this picture as I'm traveling with a bunch of farmers on the way to a soil pit. A lot of you probably don't know what a soil pit is. We can get to that later. But it's a place where you can learn about the different layers of soil. And this, believe it or not, is an organic carrot field. And as I was standing there and looking at this field, and I am not a farmer. I have no real training in agriculture or in soil science or in even ecology. But I've learned a lot from my farmer colleagues and the experts who've taken the time to teach me over the years. And as I'm looking at this field, I am thinking, is this healthy or unhealthy? What do you guys think? An organic carrot field. How many folks in this room think this is a healthy scene? Yeah, nobody would fault you. But how many folks think this is unhealthy? All right, we got a debate going on here. Now I'm happy. Okay, we have mixed opinions, and that is exactly where we want to be, because this stuff is not clear-cut, okay? And let me explain to you why, because you're all right. I mean, what could be healthier than a carrot? I mean, it's a superfood filled with beta-carotene and fiber and various other nutrients. And when you eat it, you're not going to go eat a bunch of that junk because it fills you up, right? And it's affordable, and you can buy them in big packs. And a lot of the carrots that were come out of those fields were actually turned into baby carrots, which are quite sustainable because you take ugly carrots like this, and you shave them down, and then you take whatever's left over and use that for compost on the fields. Is that news to somebody in this room that baby carrots aren't born as these perfect little plugs? That's news. Okay, yeah. So it's this kind of sustainable thing you can do with carrots. And remember, this is an organic carrot field, so it's not using a lot of the synthetic herbicides and fertilizers and all that stuff that's stuck right now in the Straits of Hormuz. It's using just compost, like the stuff you're making here on the farm. So these are all things that are very, very positive and on the healthy side, right? And then I started to think, wow, this carrot field is owned by a company that farms on over 40,000 acres in the Central Valley. 40,000 acres. And I know that what's happening to ownership of farms in this country is that farmers who farmed in the middle, like in the under around 500 acres, or the small farmers, like a lot of the farms you have around here, that acreage is shrinking. Those people are leaving the farm. A lot of that land is being turned into tract homes or being bought up by the green guys, who are the folks who own over 2,000 acres. Those farms, the corporate farms, are exploding. And that's problematic for a whole variety of reasons. It's not keeping a lot of the ownership local, and it's mass producing. So even when you're producing carrots, you're using something called F1 seeds, which are seeds that you have to go back and buy every year, that you can't save like a seed saver. But you want these because when you're mass producing carrots, you want them to be like widgets. You want them to all pack perfectly in huge trucks and last long distances to be carted around and all have exactly the same flavor, and you want them to look perfect in the Kroger's shelf and so on and so forth. So you're not growing carrots like this that are coming out of your local farms here, which are actually much more packed with nutrients, but much more likely to be very diverse in color and so on. And we know that this is the case nationally when it comes to seeds. We're seeing the same thing as with farm ownership. We're seeing consolidation in who owns our genetic material for food. All these blue dots are what used to be mom and pop seed sales folks and companies around the country, things with lovely names like Morning Glory Seeds and so on and so forth. And they've been bought up by names that you probably recognize, like Bayer or Monsanto or Corteva or so on, okay? And interestingly, a lot of these are also pharmaceutical companies. Syngenta is another one. And they own the genetic material, and they're not saving a lot of these little cute carrot hybrids. They're actually putting those companies out of business and selling the F1 seeds that you have to get every year and go to them and buy. And then I was standing there and looking at this field, and I know there's some farmers in the room. So what are you thinking when you see the yellow tops on the carrots? Yeah, something's wrong with them. As a doctor, I'd say they look a little anemic, right? Yeah. And also, this is a part of California which has historically really rich soil, but only gets 9 inches of rain a year on a good year. And what are you seeing with the water here? We're wasting it. It's flowing down towards Los Angeles. And with that is our topsoil and the nitrogen from our fertilizer and a lot of the nutrients. We're actually literally exporting soil in these ditches down to the sea is where it's eventually flowing. So a real loss of what we need in that place. And with that, we also are losing our drinking water because that actually, even though it is compost, the nitrogen from the compost is going into groundwater and making it so there's many parts of California in small farming areas where you can't drink the water anymore. And so, children and families are being harmed by this. Water and nutrients aren't the only thing that's leaking off this field. Money is leaking off this field. And that is that when you have small local farms, they contribute to the local economy. They contribute to the baseball team. They contribute to the schools. They contribute to bring in speakers to the local colleges. And when the money is going off in these large corporate instances, you're actually losing that circular economy as well. And then close your eyes for a second and think about that carrot field once it is harvested. What does that look like? Thousands of acres that look like this. So that is how you prepare this field for the next season. We used to think that this was a healthy, sign that we were getting ready for planting. We now know that what this is doing is destroying topsoil and destroying the mycorrhizal fungi that actually hold the soil together and nourish the plants in the next season, that really act like the lifeblood and the lattice of the soil. It's also aerosolizing dust into the air, which is why in these farming communities we see incredibly high rates of asthma and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease and various fungal infections in the lungs and so on. So folks are really harmed by this. It is also aerosolizing carbon into the air. And with climate change, we really care about that because our soil is one of our big potentials for actual carbon sinking. And so then I thought about this photo. Does anybody know what this is? Well, this is your classic carrot crash. This happens because we're exporting these carrots all over the country. And the average carrot in the United States travels over 1,800 miles. So you're going to get carrot crashes every once in a while, and this is what they look like. So, and then finally, how many of you had to bring your little baby carrots back to the store in the big outbreak that happened 2 years ago? This was massive. It was, Carrot-geddon. And why does it happen specifically with the baby carrots? Anybody have any idea? Yes, someone said machines. So they're processed, and then there's nothing that grows E. coli better than sticking something through a machine and then sticking it in a plastic bag and letting it sit on a loading dock for a while, right? So it was really, really problematic. Okay, let's have another vote. Healthy or unhealthy? I'm just curious. Who says healthy? Nobody. Really? I didn't intend to convince you all. Who says unhealthy? Interesting. Okay. So I still want to say that this is hard stuff. It's not clear-cut. And that's why I put this talk together specifically for the Mud Center, because I know you like to go to those places that are complicated and hard. But this afternoon, staring at that carrot field, I, as a doctor, started to think about, I'm not going to make this, just a clear-cut, decision. I'm really going to think of it more as health challenges. And what I realized that day was that there were 3 major health challenges that I was facing in that field. Everything I told you could kind of go under one of those categories or multiple categories. And one was uniformity. Uniformity of ownership, uniformity of seeds, uniformity of the way they were distributing water on that field. The next was disturbance, okay? And disturbance, obviously, with the tilling of the soil. But those were the 3 things that came together. And I have since learned that those are really sort of my golden rules for thinking about health challenges in my patients as well. I think of it more in terms of biological systems, but it really is those 3 categories. And then I started to think, well, if those are the challenges, what are the solutions? And what are the win-win solutions that will work for our health as humans? Because carrots are good for us, right? But how can we get those benefits and also protect the land? How can we protect communities and grow things? How can we use resources, but in judicious ways? And for me, the place to turn there was, first of all, indigenous wisdom. I mean, folks who have been on their land for thousands of years and have needed to take care of it understood this stuff, right? They were practicing this way. But when I look at more modern systems of farming, there are other names that have come to sort of replace some of these principles. Things like agroecological, or beyond organic, or regenerative, or permaculture. They're all saying the same thing, and they're all really talking about some very basic solutions. So I'm going to shift gears and talk to you now about solutions, okay? How do we tackle those three problems? Everybody all right with that? Okay, the problem of uniformity. What do we do about it? Well, we need to boost diversity. So when I am looking at a system and trying to figure out if it's healthy, the first thing I ask myself is, does it boost diversity? And when I'm talking about diversity, I mean on all levels, from the most minute DNA to the landscape level, okay? We are only as healthy as our tiniest, tiniest creatures. And these are all soil creatures. And nematodes, fungi, bacteria, viruses. There are good viruses too, believe it or not. Coming out of COVID, people forget that. But these are all in the soil, and you need a huge diversity of them to grow things well, because it turns out that they're specialists. And so they actually, each one of them does a job very well and captures certain nutrients very well and passes them on, even sometimes to specific kinds of plants. And this was my own personal test. Has anybody here ever done a soil Urundi's test? This is very scientific. I'm not kidding. Go look, it's published in journals. And it's great because you have a control. So this is how you do it. It's really to test how biodiverse your life is in your soil. And what you want is for whatever's under there to go crazy and eat all the cellulose in your tighty-whities. So you buy 2 identical pairs of tighty-whities. You have to wash them to get out all the junk they put in the factory in them, all the sizing. And then you lay one down in the field that you're trying to figure out what activity is going on there. In my case, it was at that point this little permaculture garden. You lay it down flat, just a couple inches below the top. Just lay it down nice and flat and cover it with soil, okay? And then you take the other undies and you do the same thing, but bury it in the most uniform soil you can have, like maybe the little golf course out front here, you know, something that's very landscaped where they're using lots of herbicides and so on. And then leave it there for 2 months and go and dig them up. And look what I found. What do you think about my permaculture garden? It's doing a pretty good job, huh? You got Swiss cheese going on there. Of course, they're not going to eat the waistband, but so you want to have this kind of activity on your farm. And this is an example of a farm in California that's often held up as the poster child for biodiversity. And their soil has been tested by many, many scientists and is just crazy with the diversity that's under there. How do you get that diversity? Well, you get it by being diverse above ground because they dance with each other. By having a whole variety of fruits and vegetables, you're calling on all these specialists underground to come and do their job of harvesting organic matter and passing it on to the rhizosphere, to the roots in the plants. Now, isn't this a perfect system? Because the more diverse above ground, who is that better for? Us, right? We need a diversity of fruits and vegetables. So diversity above ground feeds us, and diversity below ground feeds on that diversity. I love things when it all matches through. So very much of a win-win situation. And there's David Montgomery and a series of researchers have actually done an interesting study with controls, seeing how when you have this kind of soil biodiversity on a regenerative farm, you're actually growing fruits and vegetables that have higher concentrations of nutrients. It's not like off the charts, but for example, for cabbage, there was 70% more vitamin K as compared to controls, or 50% more vitamin E. And maybe for that one meal, it's not an enormous difference, but over the lifetime of eating and so on, that can make an enormous difference. So something to really think about when you have that soil biodiversity, even if you're using the same seeds, you're getting more bang for your buck. And this is Paradox Farms here, and I just saw Mitch walk into the room. Do you notice this is right? A farmer, just your neighbor here, and he also has that biodiversity going on above ground. So my guess is that your soil is rocking, right, Rich? Absolutely. Alive. And have you ever done the soil MyUndies test? Okay, well, you're just going to go home and do it. Okay. So when you get this soil diversity, what's some other ways that it impacts our health? It turns out that it actually can prime our immune system. And this is a study, this was a landmark study that was published 10 years ago in the New England Journal of Medicine. I was so excited, I was running around and waving it in front of all my colleagues, because it really is one of the first papers I saw in a medical journal that had the word farm in the title and wasn't talking about something dangerous or poisonous. Because that's how doctors often think about farm in their researches, like tetanus, you know. And this was a study that was comparing rates of asthma among Amish and Hutterite children, who genetically were very similar, culturally very similar. But it turns out that in the communities they were studying, at least, the Amish community was using a lot fewer inputs and farming in a much more sustainable or regenerative way than the Hutterite community. And what they found was the kids in the Amish community had much lower rates of asthma. And one of the hypotheses is that they were being exposed to this diversity of microbes because there wasn't the herbicides to kill them and so on. And this was actually priming their immune system. This appeared in the New England Journal of Medicine, folks, which is like the high Bible of medical literature. And if you want to get a sense of how do those children get exposed, just look at little Wesley here. This is Rebecca Summers' son. She has a farm, it's called Resilient Growers in Tulsa, in Tulsa. And this is her little son. She shared this photo with me. So it doesn't require a lot of imagination to understand how soil makes it in there, right? But even if you're eating sort of slightly washed fruits and vegetables. And this is a farm in Bavaria, which shows where they did a lot of the original studies before the Amish and Hutterite studies. Dr. Van Budia shared this photo with me. And you can see, I love how hay fever is what term we use for allergies. And in this specific study, they were showing that these children had very low rates of allergy, even though they were being exposed to all this hay. So same thing, priming the immune system with all this exposure to soil. Now, do you have to grow up on a farm to get this? It turns out no. This is a study that was published just, I think, last year, a couple years ago, in Urbana, Illinois, and it was with home gardeners, basically. And what they did was they asked very politely for a stool sample, a poop sample from home gardeners before the season started, and then they found as controls folks who didn't garden at all. And they actually measured their internal microbiomes, the biodiversity in their gut, from both the gardeners and the non-gardeners. And they found that at the beginning of the season, these two at the left using there wasn't a big difference. But by the end of the season, it really changed. And the folks who didn't have anything to do with gardening, it stayed the same, the biodiversity in their gut. The folks who gardened all of a sudden had this burst in diversity in their gut. And what's so interesting was that when they looked at the profile of the bacteria that was in there, it looked a lot like soil. And it also looked a lot like the microbiome of pre-contact tribes, like the Hadza and so on, who we actually know have very, very high, healthy gut profiles. So it turns out that just being a home gardener, at least for the gardening season, is giving you a special kind of immune boost in your gut. And by the way, they studied the microbiome of family members who were not gardening but just eating the food, and they too had a positive change. It wasn't quite as dramatic. There's something about getting down in the soil, but it turns out that these same soil bacteria seem to make a difference. This is a picture of me quite a while ago, but I had just written a piece for Yes Magazine about gardening and its relationship to mental health. And if you were to look at the cover of this with me clutching my compost bin, you would probably think, oh, the reason that gardening improves your mental health is because, it makes you happy and it's nice to garden. But in fact, it turns out that is true, but there is an actual microbe in healthy soil that's called M. vacae, which can actually talk with the vagus nerve and with the brain and improve mood and resilience. Right now, it's just being studied in mice with PTSD, but there is this hope to actually bring it to humans. And so there are soil microbes that not only improve your immunity, but improve the way you think. And this is why farmers, you might see them kneeling on their land. This is Cody Holmes on his ranch in Missouri. What they're actually doing is psychotherapy, communicating with the soil. Seed diversity is important as well. Remember, we were talking about plant diversity, but the seeds themselves, some seeds give you way more nutrients than others. These are two varietals of tomatoes, and one has 2 times the iron of the other. So really thinking about the seeds you plant as well. And finally, I can't end this conversation about diversity without talking about landowner and farmer diversity, which is really the top of that pyramid in terms of landscape. I would say that in this country as a whole, we've kind of lost the culture in agriculture. The folks who own land and farm tend to be a fairly homogeneous group, and it wasn't like that historically. Even if you look here in Virginia and in the Shenandoah Valley, the original stewards of the land and the folks who were practicing conservation agriculture originally were Native Americans, and then black farmers bringing in a lot of technology. And I mean seriously technology, because it's stuff that we now understand is a part of smart farming and conservation farming. And we're finding this in California with a lot of our Mexican-American farmers who come as migrant workers and then are given an opportunity to grow land and to get land, and we're finding that their farms are much more biodiverse and their soil is much healthier because they're actually using practices that they brought with them from Mexico. So really, in order for us all to have healthier soil, we actually need a bigger tent in terms of who is tending that soil. So moving on from diversity to the second health problem of disturbance. What is the solution to disturbance? Well, minimizing disturbance. So that's my second health check. First, does it boost biodiversity? Second, does it minimize disturbance? This is an amazing example of minimizing disturbance. Does anybody know what this is? This is kernza, which is the first kind of domesticated wild wheat in perennial form to be grown for profit in the US. And it's being grown on the Land Institute in Salina, Kansas. And the idea is that you can harvest the wheat without killing the roots, and it just comes back. And can you understand from this cross-section why it is beneficial to keep those roots in the soil? What are they doing? They're literally holding the soil in place. And with that, they're holding carbon. So these live pastures are one of our most promising solutions for climate change. If you think over the millions of acres that we're farming, if we can start to do this. This is an example of a permaculture or permanent roots in the soil farm at scale. This is Mark Shepard's farm in Wisconsin. He's growing everything from nuts to greens to seeds and so on. It's an unbelievable place if you get a chance. This is an example of the opposite of that, which is our 1.4 million acres of almonds that we grow as a commodity crop in California. When those trees die, which they always do after a certain amount, they only last so long, we're back with that same problem that you saw with the tilling, where we just have this enormous dust bowl. But there are farmers in California finding solutions to this. This is a very large almond acreage as well that is being farmed in a very, very different way. And what is happening here is that you actually have a different crop going on underneath with the sheep, and you're keeping the weeds in place so that in the wet season, they're drawing moisture away from the almond trees and keeping them from getting rot, which is a huge problem for which we usually solve with fumigants. And then in the dry season, they're doing the opposite. They're holding the moisture in and maintaining moisture in the field and keeping the soil from going away. And the beauty is that you get this layered agriculture, so you're making money off the sheep as well. Here is another way of minimizing disturbance. This is a regenerative farmer in the Central Valley who has decided that he's not going to, go to war against the weeds that are growing around his fields. In fact, he's going to invite them in with, some balance and some measure, everything in moderation. Anybody recognize what's growing there, that weed that's growing there? Mallow. You have mallow here, right? It's this unctuous, amazing in salads, absolutely amazing in salads. And it turns out that it is probably one of the most climate-resistant plants there is. It's drought tolerant. It clearly doesn't need to be planted because it's just growing there. It's pest resistant. It's high yield. It's nitrogen fixing, meaning that it moves nitrogen into the soil rather than putting it into the air where it's even more toxic than carbon. It's nutrient dense and it's tasty. And when you compare it to spinach that you might buy at Kroger's, it's got 5 times the fiber, 3 times the protein, and 4 times the iron. And this farmer realized that, and so he's been actually starting to harvest the mallow and throw it into his fancy salad mixes that he's selling at the market. This is a very funny situation. This is a high tunnel in New Hampshire, and I visited in March a couple years ago. And I walked into the high tunnel, and this farmer was telling me with great pride that he was growing tomatoes there and able to bring them to market at least a month or 2 before everybody else in town and make $1 more per pound. And as I'm walking into the high tunnel, he says, "I'm so sorry, I didn't have time to weed before you came." And he's pointing to all that stuff growing right there. Does anybody know what that is growing in front? It's chickweed. And after I left this farm, I went down and visited some friends in New York City, and I went to the Union Square Farmers Market, which is the most spendy, fancy farmers market on the planet. And look what I see. I see chickweed for $24 a pound. So this is a farmer who was excited about his $1 more a pound for his tomatoes when the real gold mine was right there, about to be yanked up in the front of and it's no shade on him. It's just this is, something that didn't even occur to him that all those New Yorkers were dying for chickweed. And so, really starting to think about how do you win-win and minimize disturbance and actually, profit off of it, right? So the third thing we talked about, remember the first thing we talked about? uniformity and boosting diversity. Second thing we talked about was disturbance and minimizing disturbance. The third thing is waste. So what's the opposite of waste? Does it conserve? I love this example. I wrote this story at the height of COVID. These were farms in the Great Plains where they had just started to cover crop. So doing a crop in between seasons of whatever their commodity crop was, soy, corn, and it was cover crops in between the seasons are another way to minimize disturbance and hold the soil in place. And they said, instead of doing a cover crop that no one's going to eat, everybody's starving out there. We have all this food insecurity where we are. Let's actually grow cover crops that have food. And then they invited the community and the food banks and what have you to come on the fields and harvest. And this is an example of some of the stuff being harvested. And what happens to everything that's not harvested? Does it go into the garbage? Where does it go? Back into the soil. So a beautiful idea of how to feed communities and minimize waste. This is a very conventional dairy farmer, also in California, who was doing some pretty innovative stuff on his farm. That stuff in the back was actually almond hulls that he dragged off from one of the big almond productions nearby, ground it up, and it turns out that it is the most wholesome, perfect cattle feed, especially for nursing cows and gestational cows. It's got tons of protein and all different kinds of healthy fats and so on. So he was recycling the reject from the almond orchards into his cattle feed. And this actually is another example from that same farm. He started cover cropping, and he decided to cover crop with daikon at local restaurants, amazing traditional food and a lot of Asian cuisines filled with fiber, incredibly good for you. But what is this cover crop also doing? It's conserving water, which is our most valuable resource in California. And I took that picture at the height of July when the rest of the Central Valley is completely dried out. And under those daikons that were not being irrigated, this is how wet it is. This is another example. This one is from Kansas. How do you conserve resources in a hoop house? Well, you put a bunch of ducks in there and get them to poop in there and regenerate the fertility after you've ended your field. So here you have win-win solutions. Boost diversity, minimize disturbance, conserve resources. And I'm going to just tell you in the last couple minutes of this talk, how do we put this into practice? And I'm going to give you a real-life laboratory of what it looks like in my community. This is the view of my office window on a good day when the oil refineries that are there in the background aren't belching out a bunch of pollutants. I see patients in Richmond, California, which actually just got very famous with the Academy Awards the other night because Ryan Coogler, who won for Sinners, Best Director, I don't know, any movie buffs in here. He got up on stage and he said, I talk a lot. I'm from Richmond. And I'm sorry, I talk a lot too, because I live in Richmond. But Richmond is a majority-minority community. We sit under the shadows of this 2,300-acre Chevron refinery. It is one of the most low-income areas in the Bay. It has the highest rates of chronic disease, highest rates of unemployment, highest rates of homelessness, highest rates of food insecurity, so on and so forth. It's also a community that has, because of the history of redlining and a lot of unfair practices in terms of ownership and so on, is incredibly activist. And so the saying is, Richmond gets it done, So it's an amazing place to practice as a doctor. And one of the things that hit California a year and a half ago was that we took our Medicaid dollars and turned them into a waiver program, which a number of states did, where we actually are able to take healthcare dollars and use them to pay for food and offer food prescriptions to our most food insecure patients who also have a diet-related chronic disease, like be it diabetes or heart disease or certain types of cancer or so on. And as doctors, we can literally give them a prescription which they can fill. So if you get one of these prescriptions, here are your options. Option one is this. It is something that is a commercial medically tailored meal, and this is a picture of our Secretary of Health and Human Services touring one of the places that manufactures many of these meals. This is somewhere in the Midwest, Oklahoma City. They make over 2 million meals a week, and they're shipped to 50 states. So this is option A that can be, our patients can choose. And I want to show you a little bit more about this meal. This is a sample meal, and these are the ingredients in that meal. I'm going to just let them speak for themselves. Do you need a couple more minutes? Okay. This is option B. This is a farm which is 2 miles from my clinic. It's called Urban Tilth. It's a regenerative farm, and it's part of a CSA where they actually collect food from other regional farmers. Option B is they can get a weekly bag of vegetables from this farm, and the Medicaid dollars go directly to the farmers to pay for these fruits and vegetables. I'm not going to ask you to choose yet, okay? I'm going to show you some more pictures from option B, because option A I don't know anything about because it's top secret and no one would answer my questions there. But option B, this is how the vegetables get packed up every week. That on the far right is one of my trainees, a medical doctor, because all of my trainees rotate for a month on the farm. Some folks are like, that's a waste of time to send doctors for a month to a farm. They learn more there than anywhere else in their entire training, I'm telling you. Then those bags of vegetables, you see the bags? All right, you follow the bag, see the bag? Okay, it comes 2 miles down the street and ends up in our culinary medicine clinics. This is another one of my trainees working in they're called healthy eating groups, HEAT groups. And working with our patients, I prefer the doctors who have no idea how to cook, who have no idea, who are the worst cooks possible, because they inspire the patients, and finally the patients come up and start teaching everybody else how to really cook, you know? So yeah, this idea that doctors also need to know how to teach people how to cook, I don't agree. They just need to be enthusiastic and be in the room. Do you guys see the bags in this picture? This is another healthy eating group. Sometimes things get pretty wild in there, kind of 3-ring circus. We got the patients, we got their kids, they're getting weighed, we got a medical student there in the background doing the cooking. This is Nancy Andrade, who is my co-conspirator, who is our wellness coach, and she and I are kind of attached at the hip. And the exciting thing is, once you've gone through your cycle of fruits and vegetables, you actually graduate with certificates and get these healthy eating certificates. And then you can re-up your prescription. And this is an example of folks graduating. We take the show on the road. We go into schools with the bags. We do the same stuff there. And this work that starts with Medicaid dollars, moving onto farms, into clinics, into communities, then flows downstream. Remember I showed you the leaky faucet? We don't have a leaky faucet because that money then pays the farm to go and train the next generation of farmers. And this is the women in agriculture who work at Urban Tilth celebrating Women in Agriculture Day. It also goes into the high schools and trains youth there. With this, we're able to plant along all the sidewalks in the community and let folks harvest. And some folks are like, well, then aren't people going to steal the food? I'm like, precisely. That's what we want them to do. But so we're keeping the ground covered. And then we all learned how to work together because of this money, and we started like dreaming big and doing other things and sticking stickies on boards during meetings. And we applied for a $34 million capacity building climate smart grant, and we got it last year. And it was all because of these dollars that go through. And this is our first group of graduates from, who are called climate health promoters, who are trained through that grant. And they're actually there to be climate health workers in the community and get folks to sign up for solar and to work on water reclamation and bringing agriculture and farming out and teaching healthy nutrition. They're like an army of health workers in the community. And you can see me kind of beaming back there. I'm always like the beaming Where's Waldo in these projects. And this funds community events and all kinds of things. And so really what's happened is by infusing those dollars into the community, and now we're actually doing, part of that 34 million is to rebuild the streets so people can walk on them and be safe, and it has many other projects attached to it. We are actually creating a 2-mile circle of health. And the 34 million is just capacity building. It's not meant to fund the project. The project is sustainable from community resources, okay? Imagine if every community in this country took 2-mile radius and did something like this. What would we look like? 2 miles, that's it. Okay, so win-win solutions. Boost diversity, minimize disturbance, and conserve resources. Can you guys remember those 3 things? Just bring them out and apply them. And if you can't remember any of this, just remember how to become a pharmacology ambassador. You need a couple things in your toolkit. You can go and get them, just at the local hardware store. One is you need a pair of knee pads, okay? Why do you need knee pads? Because some of us, as we get older, get a little prepatellar bursitis, and if you want to get down and really get that psychotherapy, you need the knee pads, okay? What's the second thing you need to be an ambassador? Anybody can guess? Tighty-whities, yes. Go buy your tighty-whities and hand them out to farmers and tell them what they're aiming for. And look under the Soil My Undies test. It's really in there, I think it's PLOS or something, okay? The third thing you need is a diversity of seeds, because you can't do this work unless we really have that diversity of genetic material. And then you need some flip cards to really convince folks. This is one of them. You want to show them how a cross-section of soil and a cross-section of our skin, you know what? In form and in function, they're actually identical in terms of the layers and the way that the vasculature works and the way that the veins versus the rootlets work. And that's because nature is actually incredibly thrifty, and when she comes up with a good design, she just does it over and over and over again. It's the same with a cross-section of soil and a cross-section of our gut. Same thing with the goblets and the villi and so on. And if you look in terms of piping systems, can you tell which one of these is the rootlets of plants and which is actually the vasculature of our kidneys? Honestly, I put this slide together a while ago, and I can't even remember, but I think this one's our kidney, the one on the left. Incredible, huh? And on an electron microscope level, can you tell which are the microbiome in our gut interacting with the villi of our intestines, and which is the microbiome in the soil interacting with the rootlets of plants? I can't remember which is which. And the truth is, at the end of the day, we kind of are soil. Thank you so much.
Hello. Yes. We have time for questions. Are there any questions?
Thank you. You said the kind of plant that you compared to spinach with the,
Yeah, mallow.
Mallow.
Does that grow here in the Shenandoah Valley? Yeah, it grows everywhere. The amazing thing with these weeds is that they're world travelers, right? A lot of them actually were domesticated in one culture and used as food. are things like mugwort or slippery oxtongue or mallow or plantain or chickweed. There is somewhere in the world where those were actually domesticated. And when folks traveled or emigrated and so on, you would take your family treasures and you take your seeds and go. And so that as a result, we have seeds that have moved all over the world. And the ones that are most resilient, we now call weeds. But a lot of them are delicious and culinary. And I was in the garden earlier, and we were identifying your garden over here. You had mugwort, you had some chickweed going there. I definitely saw some plantain. I saw a variety of mints that I wasn't quite sure what they were. And it's kind of a dandelion, which is probably the most ubiquitous culinary herb on the planet, used in every culture. I mean, what culture doesn't use dandelion? Yeah, and they're all super performers when it comes to nutrition. So a lot of folks ask me, how can I start foraging? And I say, first of all, stay away from mushrooms, unless you're really brave or have a tour guide. I don't do mushrooms. And then what you do is you pick one, leaf after another slowly, and just look for that one, and use iNaturalist. And as long as you're staying away from things like nightshade, which looks like carrot tops, so don't forage, anything that. Then what you basically want to do is just take a tiny taste. Make sure it tastes delicious, and then you usually know that you've hit something wonderful. Take it home, bring it to your local farmer and ask them, and so on. Any foragers in the room? Wonderful. How do you do your identifying?
For mushrooms.
Oh, brave. Your kidneys are still with us. Good.
My dad's the expert.
Okay, yeah, make sure you talk to your dad. And don't forage for mushrooms anywhere else other than your place, because we have folks that come from Europe and are 110% certain that they found a morel or something, and then they end up dead. So don't, yeah. As a doctor, I don't like dead. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for that wonderful talk. You spoke a little bit about the divide between medicine and agriculture and how you think that that's kind of ill-conceived for our modern world. What do you think the impacts of that divide are, and how can we fix it?
Well, the impacts of the divide are on so many different levels, and I'm hoping that my talk illustrated some of them. But the reductionism has allowed us to basically not think of whole system solutions. So as doctors, we're running around the hospital trying to solve things, end stage, or as the horse is already out of the barn, to use the agricultural metaphor. And in agriculture, they're not thinking about health. They're just thinking about profit or productivity. Not farmers like you, Mitch. I know you're thinking about health. But we're talking about as a system. And so, being able to understand that there are both working for the same goal, which is this win-win goal of protecting the planet and protecting humans. And it really is the solution. I believe it's the solution to all of the biggest problems that we're facing. Everything from political divisions, because it actually creates a big tent. I can go anywhere in the country and talk about this stuff, and on with any group, and I find like-minded people and folks that I connect with. It really is. It's something that brings us all together, because we all eat, right? And we all love farmers, and we all love soil. It turns out. And it is the solution to definitely many of the environmental problems. Not only is soil ending up being one of the most promising sinks for soil and nitrogen and so on, but it's, by protecting it, we are preventing less erosion, less loss of nutrients, less aerosolization of soil and of carbon and so on. So I think it is the sweet spot for tackling lots of things. I mean, right now, we're seeing the devastation from closing down the Straits of Hormuz, where basically all our fossil fuels are being held up there. And agriculture is completely dependent on fossil fuels, not just for fertilizer and the synthetic fertilizer, but all the herbicides and pesticides that are used. And what's going to happen in a couple of weeks? The farmers who are farming regeneratively and who are not using these inputs are the ones who are going to truly be resilient and who are going to be the ones that are going to be able to feed us. So very soon we might all be acutely aware of these issues.
Just a quick question on this grant for $34 million. Was that a federal grant or state or some?
So it was a state grant. It was through the EPA. Oh, all gone. The amazing thing was the money, the federal dollars came into California before everything was taken away. So we actually have the 5 years of funding. It's, as I said, it's an infrastructure grant, a capacity building grant, which is the kind of money that should come to communities. In order to get this grant, we not only had to show that we were economically deserving of it, which Richmond certainly is, but we had to show that we played well together as a community, meaning that all the partners, from the solar installers to the folks who did landscape design and built our streets, to city government, to the clinics, to the water reclamation folks, to community members, that we could all sit in the same room and plan and talk and do stickies and so on. And we might not have been able to do that had we not had these other projects we were working on beforehand. To farms, the farm, we're actually, our clinic is a subcontractor to Urban Tilth, that farm, on this grant, which is crazy. Because usually healthcare strides into the room and says, I am the principal investigator here. I take the money and then sort of dish it out. We are a subcontractor to a farm as a clinic. But it was federal dollars that we then digested through the state. Yeah. This is how I believe our money should be spent. I believe that this is how we transform health in communities.
Any other questions? We're good? All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you all so much. I'm really grateful. Yeah. And I'll be here for a couple minutes in case anybody had a quiet question they wanted to ask. Or correction. I love feedback. So.